Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Ceesay with CBJ, and I am your host Cherno. In this episode, I had an amazing conversation with Haddijatou Ceesay, a fearless Ph.D. holder and a devoted social justice advocate. We're delving deep into the topics our culture often shies away from: FGM, sexual abuse, and sexual reproductive health. Now these are not just conversation, but they are catalysts for change. So, join us as we challenge taboos, question norms, and ignite conversations that can transform our world. Get ready to explore the unexplored and challenge the unquestioned. And if you love listening to my podcast, please share it and subscribe. Your support means the world to me. So enjoy the episode. Thank you. All right. 3, 2, 1, boom. And here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, Haddijatou Ceesay. Haddi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, folks. I hope you're doing well today.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm chilling. Alhamdulillah, It's the weekend. So, happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you very much.
So now your viewers will know that we did this on your birthday.
Yeah, even though the episode is probably not going to be posted until next week, but yeah. This is kind of my birthday gift because my wife is not here right now, and my daughter they traveled. My wife went to see her mom, so I've just been home for the weekend, and I'm like, you know what, this is my birthday gift.
That's lovely. I'm glad that it sucks that they had to travel on your birthday, but
Yeah, but it wasn't actually really planned. It wasn't planned. It's that she couldn't find a ticket back home on a perfect time. So I was like, just stay there. I'm good. I'm not really big on birthdays. That's the thing. Yeah. But by the way, congratulations on your PhD as well. You told me last week that you had your exam. So how was that?
It was very nerve-wracking, but then I think I was just really, really stressed out. But then alhamdulillah, the defense went really well, and we're officially doctor now. So I need to get comfortable with using my doctor title, but alhamdulillah.
Thank you.
It's been a culmination.
I should say then. I should be saying Dr. Haddijatou Ceesay then. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I'm just not used to it. That's it. But it's been like a culmination of obviously the hardest years of my life. So to finally see that coming to an end, I'm just really, really, really thankful for it.
Wow. Well, I feel like also this conversation we're about to have can basically go anywhere today, given the sensitive, controversial nature of the topics we're going to be discussing today, especially within our culture. But does it usually excite you or does it frighten you when you're having these conversations?
It excites me because it's also the thing is I've been doing work around gender-based violence, gender justice, social justice and stuff since I was 17 or 18. So it's been 11, 12 years of my life that I've been having conversations around, sexual and reproductive health, FGM, all of that. So it feels very second nature to me. And if there's one thing that I can talk about all the time, it's that. So, and I think as well, because there's so much stigma around these topics, it's really, really important to have these conversations. Yeah,
that's true. I mean, I appreciate your boldness actually into addressing these questions because it's very important. It's just a strange thing that how society sees sex, that even though it's a fundamental driver of human civilization, but yet there's so much lack of in-depth conversation. And it becomes this weird, awkward thing, whether it's sexual abuse or whether it's FGM. And we'll get into all those later. But, just the topic of sex overall, it becomes such a weird thing. Why do you think it's like that?
Well, for many reasons. I think especially when we're talking about our communities, especially I would say Gambia specifically, we have this idea that talking about sex is not aligned with Islam. Which, because of that, everyone tends to shy away from it because you're under this assumption of oh my gosh, is this haram? But I think it's so important to realize that, Islam talks about modesty, but modesty and shame are not the same thing. and we've used sex to be something that's shameful. But the reality is we all got here in one way or another through two people having sex. So it's not something, because even, you know, the Prophet ﷺ, there's so many hadiths like around sex. There's so many, you know, discussions from back then around, you know, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, and all of that. So if we shied away from those conversations, then we would never have a full understanding of what intimacy is supposed to be. And, you know, who intimacy is for, how it's catered, and all of that. So I think it's because of that idea of like, maybe Islam doesn't allow us to talk about sex is one of the reasons why we tend to shy away from it. Because like, for example, even with, I found this out like a couple years ago, the fact that like in Wolof, you say for sex.
Say,
so
yeah,
same,
we do.
Same way sex, yeah. And so there's not even like a word for it outside of like the context of marriage as well, which makes it really difficult to have the kind of nuanced conversations that we're supposed to have. Because like, again, because of that shame and that stigma.
That's true, because people don't know say means marriage also in Wolof. So, and we use it to say sex. I never thought about that. It kind of just, you know, means like, so basically when you get married, I don't know how to put it in words, but it's like, it doesn't mean anything. Like sex is not important when you get married, you know, and
And that's the funny thing, because I mean, I had brought it up when we were talking like last week about how like even in Islam, the fact that like if you're not having like you're not sexually fulfilled in your marriage, that's grounds for divorce. So that's how important it is.
It is.
You know, that's how important sex is, and that's how important it is like within couples and all of that. But it's like the last thing we talk about. And even when we start talking about it in our communities, you'll usually hear it from like when someone is about to get married. When the reality is like sexuality education in itself is something that's supposed to start like from like when you're young. Like, you know, it's supposed to be age appropriate and like incremental throughout, but like you don't just go from like 0 to 100.
But do you think it's like in Islam, like the importance of it, is it like, which level is it on? Because, you know, like, for example, when you're choosing a spouse in Islam or in most cultures, you know, people don't just go and start having sex first, like, even though it's like, it's an important thing, but, you know, you look at character, you look at the person's religion or the person's culture or the family that they're from. And then after that comes, and most of the time when the sex doesn't go right, usually disappointment happens. You know what I mean? It's like everything else that you like in that person can actually go away just because of a bad sexual relationship or not having a good intimacy. So do you think it should be like, on what level or what degree do you think it should be on?
I think these are conversations that like couples should have very early on. Like if you know, feel like you're planning on getting married to someone and all of that, it's so important to have questions around intimacy. So like, you know, we're speaking on a Muslim context, and we're obviously there's this assumption that no one is having sex until marriage, but like we know what the reality is. Yeah. But so even if you're waiting, if you're not waiting, all of that, it's still important to have conversations around expectation, around like what, you know, you think, what your sexual fulfillment looks like, what your partner's sexual fulfillment looks like, and then making the decisions together. So it's not just one person thinking, oh, this is what I want, and then never communicating it. Because I think a huge part of intimacy as well is communication. And it's about talking about like, you know, again, your needs, your wants, your desires, and making sure that you have a partner that loves and respects you enough to want to fulfill those needs and desires. So it's important, obviously, but it's not like, I think what happens is we completely forego the conversation until we're in the marriage or we're in the relationship, when the reality is it's supposed to be something that should be talked about in conjunction once you've decided that, you know, okay, this is the person that I want to be with, and this is the person that I want to spend the rest of my life with.
Well, that's a great way to start the conversation. I'm enjoying it so far. But, you know, I want to just kind of go back a little bit, because me and you already know each other, but we don't really know where we're really from. Like, we don't really know a lot about our childhood. And I want to just dig a little bit deeper and just go back to that young Haddi, you know, childhood Haddi. Like, what were young Haddi's, you know, personal experiences? What were your traumas and the curiosities that you had that led you to become who you are today?
I think I've always been very curious. Hence the reason, like, I'm a researcher and with the whole PhD thing. I've always been that person where I need to know why. Like, I need to have the answers to everything. Mm-hmm. So because of that, I've always, because of that curiosity, and like, especially around topics that were never really talked about or questioned, I always felt like there needs to be more, there needs to be more. Mm-hmm. So, and it's not like I came from a family that is like very, very open and all of that with talking about things like at all. I remember, when was it, 2 years ago or so, like there was this, I think there was a video I did on like something around sexual reproductive health, I think around sexually transmitted infections or something. And it was on Facebook or somewhere. My mom called me and was like, oh, when you're doing these videos, try not to just say private parts instead of like, saying vagina, penis and stuff like that. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that, because like these are scientific words. And if I'm going to be talking about it, then it needs to be talked about in the way that it should be. And I think that's what it is. I've always been curious and I've always been very brave. So I've never really been someone to shy away from anything. Okay. So that has always, I think that's been my driving force. And again, I had been exposed to really, really brilliant, wonderful women as well that talked about so many of their experiences, like just really good friends who were always open with what was going on in their lives, especially like around with violence and with FGM and stuff like that. And so I was able to, once I, because I'm Wolof, I didn't learn about FGM because it's not really practiced that much in our culture until I was like 17 or something like that.
So that's these experiences you're talking about, was it when you were young? Like, are you talking about these as your young self or when you got older?
I mean, with my youth, I think the only thing, it was just curiosity. It was just one thing to know more. That was my thing. But I always knew I had a passion for like women's health. I think that's what was also my driving force. I always knew I had a passion for women's health. It's just that I didn't know where that passion would manifest. So for the longest, I thought, I should be an OBGYN so I can help women that way. But I went on further to learn about FGM and all these other things from other people. And I was like, these things are happening in our communities and they're not getting as much traction as they should be. So I also want to do something about it. And then I started university, and I remember taking my first public health class, and like we talked about sexual and reproductive health, and it was like light bulbs and just sparks and flames were going off in my head. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, I can't believe like there's an entire field and study where people just literally talk about sex all the time. And so I was like, okay, I want to do this. And I was able to connect that passion with the work that I was already doing in the Gambia as well.
Have you dealt with any personal traumas that kind of, molded you for like to be in the path that you are on also right now?
I think all women have at some point or another, like gone through some kind of trauma around like sexual violence, like whether it's talked about or not, you'll always, whether it's someone that's groping you in the middle of the street, whether it's, assault when in like, or, in the household or something. Like, I don't know a single girl or woman that doesn't have a story. Wow. So it just depends on what you choose to do with that story. But every single one I know. That's true. Yeah. So
you've talked about all the things that you're studying right now, which is FGM, sexual abuse and all these things. So for me to really understand, for my dumb brain to understand, because it's like, I feel like sometimes my brain doesn't really take things in very well. But in the simplest term, could you just explain to me what your research is all about and what you're actually doing? Okay, and after that, we can try to take it one at a time and just make people understand more.
That is no problem. It's a bit, that's the thing as well. It's my research and my work, even though they're similar, they were still quite a bit different. So I'll start off with my research and actually what led me to it. So for me, again, like I've been working in Gambia, like around sexual violence and sexual and reproductive health issues for my entire life. But especially, like, I'll talk about FGM and child marriage specifically, right? There is this thing where you go into the communities to talk about asking them why FGM is happening, why child marriage is happening. And I remember one of the reasons that always came up was that, you want your daughter to be marriageable. And then in my head, I was like, okay, if you want them to be marriageable, just teach them about, sex, tell them about sex, and tell them that if you do this, X, Y, and Z happen. So therefore, don't do this, teach them the tools and just give them the education that's necessary. So for me, that's always where my head went. And so that led me to realize that education is the basis of everything. And this is just me doing an oversimplification of everything, by the way. So I was like, okay, education feels like it's the basis of literally everything. So I want to see what kind of sex education Gambia has available. So that's what I ended up doing my research in. I basically looked at what kind of sex education was available back then, which is Pop FLE. And then after Pop FLE, there was a 20-something year gap where there was no kind of sexual and reproductive health education. And then now Gambia is in the process of implementing a new curriculum in the schools. So I was studying the feasibility of the curriculum, trying to see whether or not, if implemented, whether young people will have any kind of benefit to it. Basically, will it be beneficial? And whether or not there are sociocultural factors that will hinder it, like religion, like patriarchy, stuff like that. And even while I was doing that, I actually worked with UNFPA to develop an out of school curriculum for young people in the Gambia as well. So, so that is what my PhD research is. And then, so we can talk about that, and I can talk about
so we can just start with the SRH, because of course you're advocating for it, but for me, for example, who's never been to school, I never went to school in Gambia, I studied in a boarding school, so this is something that is completely new to me. So how do we even teach? How can you even put that in a curriculum? What is it that you teach in SRH, if you could explain that?
Yeah, it's a lot of different things. So, for example, right now, a lot of it is purely biological, which is something I 100% want us to move away from, because sex isn't just the physical act of penetration or whatnot, but it's also stuff around again, to young people who know and have an understanding of their bodies, around, I'm trying to think of the words, not just have an understanding of their bodies, but also understand the mental, physical, the emotional toll that comes with sex. And not just even in a negative way, but it's are you prepared? Do you know what you want for yourself? Do you know what you want for your partner? Do you have an understanding of what pleasure is? Do you know how to advocate for yourself? And also it's stuff around knowing how to say no. If you choose not to want to engage in anything, do you feel safe enough to say no? Do you feel like you have someone that you can talk to, someone that you can report to? So there's all these other factors that go into
SRH.
Sex. SRH, just because, and I think that's also the problem, where as soon as you hear about sex or sexual and reproductive health, the first thing, or comprehensive sexuality, just any kind of sex education, the first thing people assume is that you're teaching people how to have sex. Because I get that all the time.
That's what I'm thinking.
No, it's not that at all. I get that all the time, where as soon as I'm talking, it's so what are you going to be able to teach me? And I'm I'm not teaching you that.
Well, I'm thinking also in the aspect of the health, maybe when it comes to other sexually transmitted diseases that are coming into it and all those things. Yeah, I'm thinking in that aspect also. Yeah.
Exactly. So you talk about infections, you talk about sexually transmitted infections and all of that. There's this thing called the ITGCSE manual. So it's this manual that UNFPA, UNESCO, all of them use around developing models for healthy sexual and reproductive health education. And so this handbook, there's basically 8 different factors that should go into teaching SRH.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. And only one of the sorry, only one or two of the guidance, like one or two of the chapters talk about like actual sex, but everything else, focuses on like all these other different aspects, such as like your values and your rights, knowing what rights you have as a person, as a human being, understanding culture, understanding even interpersonal relationships between people. Like all of these are things are very, very important to understand. And even like understanding gender, understanding. So there's a lot more things that go into sexual and reproductive health than just the having sex part. And usually what happens in schools as well, it's like there's this tendency to take a very sex negative approach. So it's this thing of like, don't talk about sex, don't have sex. This is what periods are. This is what STIs are, even if STIs are talked about at all. And then that's it. So you leave. And the thing is, young people are very curious people. So if you don't have the conversations that you need to have, and if you're not talking about like sexuality and sexual and reproductive health holistically, you tend to have this issue where it's like, okay, if you're not telling me enough, I'm going to go find out in other ways. And those other ways are leading to harm. Because let's say in Gambia, for example, if you're having sex and you're having unprotected sex and you end up with an STI, where are you going to go to treat your STI?
Yeah.
Or are you even going to talk about it to begin with?
No.
So that's the thing. And then these STIs end up leading to long-term complications. So you're talking about infertility, you're talking about like all these, just a bunch of other different complications that will lead to, and then you're passing it on and you're transmitting these diseases and illnesses to other people as well. So,
but I guess, I guess what, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. It's like,
no,
at what age, for example, is this going to be only taught to girls only, or is it going to be teach to boys also? And like, what age should they start teaching them, about these things?
It's going to be taught to everyone, in school. And again, UNFPA have an out-of-school curriculum as well that should be in the process of implementation as well. So because both girls and boys need SRH education. Learn, both of them. Like every single person needs it. So for me, I personally think that it should start off very, very young. So when I talk about very young, I'm talking about but I'm talking about age appropriate sex education. Though I'm not talking about go to like a 3-year-old and tell them this is exactly what sex is. Because at that age, I think they should be learning about their body parts and what good touch is and what bad touch is. So identifying
good touch. What is good touch?
So with that, it's basically a way to, for young people to be able to communicate if someone touches them inappropriately.
Okay.
So identifying which body parts are like a no-go area versus like, where basically identifying what's a no-go area and what isn't. So in like, again, because sexual abuse is so rampant and it's like, if you're not telling kids like the names of body parts and the names of like their private parts and all of that, it's very possible and likely that someone could abuse them or assault them and they won't have the language for it.
True.
But when you start introducing the language early and once you start making sure that they realize that, oh, this is a trustworthy adult that I can talk to if something happens, then God forbid, but if something happens, they'll be able to come back to you and say X, Y, and Z touched me here, X, Y, and Z touched me there.
Okay. And also it's like, because especially for Gambia, I can only speak for Gambia because it's a Muslim majority country. Like what ways are they using actually when they're teaching them? Do they think about our culture also? Do they think about our Islamic principles when they're teaching it? Because I feel like for me, I grew up in a very religious house, so those things were never talked about. I went to Islamic studies my whole life. Like, I have very good Islamic education, but sex was never talked about. So, like you don't even say it. You know what I mean? So how do we still teach? Because I do, advocate at some point to like, they should be learning about it, but like how much should they be? How much should they be knowing? You know what I mean? Because, I think when we talk on the phone, you were talking about, when you teach somebody, I think something like when they do the haram, that's between them and God. But like, how can we just respect our Islamic principle while we're able to teach this, basically?
So I think, again, this goes back to this idea of like shame versus modesty. Again. So I think because we view sex and anything around it to be so shameful versus like actually something that we're supposed to be modest about. So, again, this is not about saying, I think, again, because we have this idea that sexual and reproductive health or any kind of education around sex, it's more about the act of having sex. We tend to forget everything else that it comes with. And there's nothing, that is immodest about talking about the fact that, so for me, I look at it like, for example, STIs, it's an illness. It's something that you should get help for. It's not something that you should be shamed for. It's something that, and the thing is, and it also, sorry, I know my thoughts are all over the place, but I also tend to think about the do no harm principle when it comes to Islam and how Islam is big on like not harming. But when you're not talking about these things, you're actually causing harm, because then now it's a societal problem and it's a societal issue where it's like you're dealing with higher pregnancy rates, you're dealing with higher STI rates, you're dealing with higher, instances of violence. So, so that's my thing where I feel like it's this conflation of shame and modesty or immodesty. Yeah. But Islam is not telling you don't talk about these things at all. Because if that was the case, then again, we wouldn't have any kind of hadiths or anything around sex in any kind of way. Like we would have never heard the Prophet ﷺ talk about pleasure. We would have never heard anything at all. So we actually do come from a very sex positive religion. I think it's just the blend of culture that kind of throws things off. Because once you mix culture with religion, then you're not sure which either one is saying. And also, this is my take as well, a lot of the time, I feel like because a lot of cultural and religious practices tend to lean towards like the patriarchal side, it's a way for men and men in power to tell women what they think without backing it up, and then just ended up causing more harm. So it's like...
What do you mean exactly?
For example, if you come to me and tell me, God said X, Y, and Z, but I don't have any kind of religious knowledge. Or it's the same way where it's like, how they always love that hadith about if you don't have sex with your husband, then like the angels will curse you throughout the night. Yeah. No one talks about the fact that, but no one, you don't hear it from both angles. You just hear it from the man's side. That it's the... because I guess most of the time the man has more knowledge than the woman. So most of the time, Yeah. And then it's also like, for example, with the verse on divorce, right? In Islam, right? So about how like the throne of Allah shakes when divorce happens. It's funny when you actually learn about the types of divorce that's in Islam. Allah specifically mentions talaq, which is male initiated divorce. So that's the kind of divorce where it's like the man just gets up one day and decides that they no longer want to be in the marriage. But then they shame women for trying to leave marriages. And they shame them for like not wanting to stay in the marriage and being like, look, Allah's throne is shaking because you're trying to get a divorce. But it's like, no, Allah specifically talks about talaq, not fasq and not qul. So, and those are, the other two types of divorce in Islam.
But what's your view on that? Is that something that you have you disagree on? Is there something that you're trying to say about it? Like the fact that Allah used talaq as a male?
No, what my view on that is the fact that like religion is not, basically our lack of understanding of religion ends up leading to more harmful practices. Okay. So so that's what I'm trying to say, because it's like if we understood, if there was enough like education around religion. So for me personally, I think the moment anyone decides that they want to believe in a certain religion, it's important to go and learn about it. It is
That's true.
absolutely
Yeah.
very, very important. Do not let anyone sit and tell you this is what Allah said, this is what Allah said. It didn't say. Like, take the time to learn for yourself, because there's such a thin line between like learning about religion and abuse, specifically spiritual abuse, because a lot of the, like, I've heard it so many times where they'll like literally misquote some kind of Quranic verse and then tell you that this is what Allah said, therefore, like, whatever you do outside of this is completely haram. But it's like, no, like, I'm taking the time to learn the religion for myself. And therefore, you can't tell me what is haram or what is halal or what Allah said or what Allah didn't say, because I'm learning it for myself. But that's what happens a lot in our communities and in our societies, especially, again, because I'm Gambian, so that's what I can talk about. And even in my experience in the United States as well, where it's like you're literally you're willfully misquoting a scripture or a verse to suit your agenda. And a lot of the time it tends to be very patriarchal.
That's true. Yeah. It does come off like that. I mean, and I don't think it's even only when it comes to the man and the woman thing. Even men do it to men sometimes, you know, whether you're advising your friend or someone that you know, most of the time people do that. And then they always end up, you know, saying the verse and maybe they don't even understand it and they take it out of context in a way that the verse comes. Maybe they don't understand the way or the time when that verse dropped. What was the reason for the verse to actually come down in the first place? So most of the time is very difficult, but people should be taking their own time to be learning themselves to understand the religion and what the Quran actually say. Yeah. But that makes sense. But when it comes to the STI part you're talking about, I think most of the time it's not even the fact that people are scared to talk about the shame. It's just the fact that they feel shame because maybe they've committed zina, for example, and they just don't want to talk about it because the moment you said you have a disease or something, people are like, oh, okay. You know, instead of maybe trying to figure out, okay, how to help that person, you're already judging the person for the haram that they committed instead of just leaving them to deal with that with God. So, you know, most of the time that's where, you know, you start to judge the person already instead of focusing on the issue. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. But also I feel like it's, and this I think it's gendered as well. I'm not going to lie to you, because I feel like when men talk about the fact that they're having sex in any kind of capacity, like no one is judging them. No one, like, it's like a very natural thing for men to go around. And we should
be judged. We should be, you know?
So it's that thing as well. But it's like, again, like even if we don't talk about it, we know what the reality is on the ground in Gambia, especially. We know that a lot of young people are having sex, whether it's consensual, whether it's non-consensual, it's happening. And, you know, I think it's so important to step away from, like, yes, Gambia is a 90-something% religious country. And even with Christianity as well, Christianity doesn't, you know, Christianity talks about no sex until marriage as well. But at the end of the day, the reality is we are a secular state. So it's still very important that the government, you know, these hospitals and everything have mechanisms in place to allow for testing for STIs, and in a way that also doesn't further stigmatize or add shame. Because you'll hear it all the time where it's like young people don't even want to go to see doctors, or they don't, because this is like from my research as well, where they don't want to go see healthcare professionals, because it's like, it's this assumption that if I go there, someone's going to see me and they're going to go tell my parents. So even if it's like a very small thing, like maybe you're going in to birth control and it's not even birth control for like sex, it's like birth control because like your periods are bad, or like any other reason to be using contraceptives, because there's multiple reasons to use contraceptives. But then it's like this automatic fear that if someone finds out that I'm using contraceptives, and they're going to go ahead and like snitch on me, and then I'm going to get in trouble because everyone's going to think I'm doing something.
Yeah. I remember I used to, like, I went to do a HIV test one time, I think my first time, and I was like just looking around, looking like I was about to make a drug deal or something, because I was trying to make sure that no one see me. But I think I did one when I went to Dr. Ismail Abaji's clinic, which was the Innova clinic. And that was, I think, one of the first places that I felt safe to actually talk to the doctors about everything that I feel, everything that I'm going through and everything. But just overall, just tells you just like, you know, that fear that you have in our culture, in our community, when you're going to go do something, you have to drive. When they call you like, Cherno, where are you going? You're like, oh, I'm just going to go run some business. You know, you're not even going to talk about it because you don't want people to ask you questions or to be able to think that something is wrong with you or happening with you, something that has to do with related with sex. You know what I mean? But do you think do you think should it be the parents' job also to teach their children about sex instead of even teaching them at the school?
Absolutely.
Because, you know, when it comes to the school, like you said, it's a big topic. You know, there's a different ways of teaching, but the person who's teaching, I mean, I don't know how much they're invested into whatever they're teaching those kids, right? So shouldn't it be the parents' job to be the one to teach them about this, so they don't even have to, you know, go through that?
I think I absolutely think the parents should be teaching as well, but I don't think it should rest on just like one or the other. I think it's a communal thing, because sex, again, it's a very communal thing. It does not just impact the one person that is, you know, having it. Like if something else happens, it's impacting everyone else. But I think it's really, really, really important that parents talk to their kids as well. So I think, and for young people as well, you know, having that safety and that communication with parents, like it helps a lot. And it makes it even more feasible for them to listen when teachers are talking. So I think 100 million%, like it's important to have the conversation with parents. But also it's like this thing of, our parents giving them the right information. No, go ahead.
Because I have a daughter now, and I think me and my wife had a discussion, like when she gets to a certain age to have basically a relationship with her, like I don't know, when she's 15 or 16 or whatever. And I'm like, I don't want to be the one having that conversation. You know what I mean?
Why not?
No, like I might change my mind. You know, I'm an open-minded person. There are certain things I'll probably have a conversation with my child that my wife probably don't want to, because maybe she thinks that's not right. But when it comes to sex, it's just like, because I wasn't taught that way, I didn't know that. So it seemed like that's the only thing I know. Like there should be there should be a boundary between a parent and a child, you know, of the things that they should talk about. You know, so I don't know. What do you think?
I think that it is up to us to change that kind of mentality. So, and you know, I think even now talking about it, it's a huge deal, but I think it's really, really, really important that as a father, you have that kind of relationship with your daughter where you can talk to her about these things. And again, it's not like one day it's not like someone just coming and telling you that this is the entirety of my sex life or anything. It's not that at all.
No.
It's just like about keeping that open channel of communication and keeping that trust and knowing that this is a person that I can tell everything to in my life. And this is not someone who I have to shy away from or hide things from. And even waiting till 15, 16 is late. So it's stuff around like...
Really?
Yeah, it's late.
What?
Yeah.
I was thinking 25.
No, but that's the thing again. Like sexual and reproductive health. I'm just kidding. It's across the lifespan.
No, I'm just
so
kidding.
Like we said, yeah. So like there's the good touch, bad touch. There's talking about periods. There's talking about, you know, all of those different kinds of things.
But I think that's the reality, right? Like we're living in that type of society now, and I don't want to be advocating that is okay to be going around, and because I feel like there's just so many other topics and so many things that comes with it when it comes to just teaching them about that. Because you feel like, well, I guess it depends how you teach them, so that they should know to be having maybe one partner, not to just be going around, like you said, the good touch, the bad touch. You should be teaching them so that, you know, these things for them to know. But you just fear that once they know and they seem like, oh, okay, I have a friend there whose parents didn't teach them about this, and they're just going around doing crazy things. So that, you know, that seems to be normal. So I can go around and do a lot of harams. So like, I feel like there's just a lot of scare. And as a parent now, that's what I'm thinking about, like when it gets to that, because when I see young kids running around, whether it's girls or boys, you know, just running around, because for me, I just look at them both the same. You know, I'm not just looking at, oh, okay, only girls are wearing this or walking around. I look at the boys as well, because I feel like if every man learns about sex and knows how to control it, I think it will be a safer world. You know, there will be so much less of so many other things, you know. So, you know, I think that's just what goes through my mind sometimes when I think about if I'm going to have that conversation, you know. Yeah.
And again, I think that's the issue as well, where we automatically assume that when someone learns about sex, they have it. But research has shown that actually young people delay any kind of sexual debut the more information they have. So the more understanding they have, there's this idea, the more you know about what comes with it and the responsibilities around engaging in any kind of sexual activity. And it makes you think, is this something I really want to do? So literally across the board, like any kind of research that you look across, like sex education is actually one of the ways to ensure that young people are not having sex at an early age. And it also puts them in this position of like having enough information that they're protecting themselves in any kind of sexual activity. So it's like there's increased condom use, limited, a decrease in teenage pregnancy, decrease in STIs, and again, just a complete overall decrease in any kind of sexual activity to begin with. So it's the lack of talking about it is actually what is causing problems.
Yeah. And that part I understand, because I will just say, even apart from sex, when it comes to alcohol and drugs, because I went through a life like that where that was never talked about in my life, right? So whether it was drugs, alcohol, partying, all these things. And I kind of went that way because I thought it was okay, because I didn't have any information about it. I didn't know about it. And only thing I got from it was don't do it. And it was in a very aggressive way. So, when you're young and somebody's telling you not to do something that seems to be very you seem to have a lot of joy in it. You just want to keep doing it, So, and then that part I understand of it. If you don't talk about it, it won't, it's better to talk about it, basically. Yeah.
Because the minute you remove that kind of stigma, like then there's this opportunity to really just have a better understanding. And once like that happens, it's like, oh, actually, this is not as scary, but also I don't think this is what I need in my life right now. So you can to make decisions from a place of like understanding rather than a place of fear. And when fear comes, you want to rebel. So that's the thing.
True.
So it's really, really, really important for me. Yeah. That's what I believe.
Now, I want to just get into FGM, and I know that's something that you've started to do when you started to going through this journey. And if you just please explain to me what FGM means, and why is that term being used, and what is this practice about, and why is it such a big concern, in many communities? Yeah.
So FGM, which is female genital mutilation, is the practice of like basically any kind of what's the word? Sorry, my brain is not braining right now, guys.
Are you like an overthinker also?
Big time.
Welcome. You see, sometimes the way I stutter when I talk is because I'm thinking about so many things at the same time. I'm losing it.
Yeah. And it's like, this is something I've talked about my entire life as well. But yeah, so FGM, or female genital mutilation or cutting, is the removal of like the vulva or the clitoris for non-medical reasons.
Okay.
So it is not a medical procedure at all. There's like not a singular benefit for women, girls and women in any kind of way. And it's a practice that, although like we tend to conflate it with Islam, it's a practice that has been going on for like over 2,000 years plus. Like it actually, from my research, it was traced back to like ancient Egypt. So it's a pre-Islamic thing, and it has no benefits for women. If anything, it, physiologically, and psychologically, it messes with you. So increased depression, increased anxiety, trouble with your period, trouble with giving birth or conception in general, increased risks of infection, increased risk of bleeding. Like there's just like the list goes on and on and on. Like there's so many harms to it. And it doesn't matter because there's technically 4 types of FGM. So there's one that's just the partial removal of the vulva, of the clitoris. There's type 2, which is the removal of the clitoris and the vulva. And there's type 3, which is like when they sew the vaginal opening. So they'll sew it.
The complete vaginal opening.
Yeah, they'll just leave like a little bit of space for like period blood, but that's it. And so when a woman is getting married after that, they literally have to like remove that and then like force penetration happen, which is like apparently very, 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 very painful. And because the clitoris is cut as well, there's like a lack of, the clitoris basically is like the only organ in all of our bodies, male and female, that's specifically designed for pleasure. Like that's it.
Yeah.
Like, and it has about 8,000 nerve endings compared to about 4,000 nerve endings for the head of the penis, I believe. So it's literally double the nerve endings. And then imagine just removing that completely and deciding that someone just shouldn't have any kind of pleasure.
Why do you think at that time they just come and decide that, okay, women shouldn't have pleasure? Like, why do you think, what was the motive behind this?
For different cultures, it's different reasons, but I would just narrow it down to this idea. Like, for example, let's just put it in the Gambian context, right? There's this idea that if a woman has undergone FGM, then because she won't have any pleasure, she will not be interested in having sex outside of marriage.
Okay.
And there's also this idea that if you have not been cut, then you're unclean. So you're a solima.
Unclean, like how?
So I say that's what, like, okay. You're solima, so you're unclean because apparently having, the clitoris just makes you dirty. I'm not even sure like what it means because it just doesn't make sense to me. That any body part that like, we are born with is unclean. It's not, I don't think it's a sensible or viable thing at all.
Yeah.
And so there's this idea that, okay, if a girl undergoes FGM, she just will not have, and for some men, especially when it comes to like the type 3 FGM where like the woman is sealed, she tends to feel tighter or whatnot. And so for the men, it's more pleasurable for them.
So even if this woman has never been through sex in her life, that can still be done to her, and then yet she'll get married, and then they'll still call it what, tight? Like,
yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of women, they don't even, like, for some, I know so many stories of people that didn't even know that they went through type 3, where they were completely sewn up until like the nights of their wedding. And then it's like, they just had like the worst kind of sexual experience.
So have you met or talked to any of these, like, any women who've been through this?
Oh, yeah.
How do they deal with that trauma, and how do they cope with that?
It's really, really difficult. It's really, really difficult. And it's what makes it easier, obviously, is having an understanding partner. But for a lot of them, like, sex is not something that they enjoy. It's not something that they kind of want any kind of business with. And it's not something, and even like giving birth in itself is like a really, really difficult thing, because the thing is, like, once you undergo FGM, the muscles around the vagina, or even the vaginal muscle, is not as flexible anymore because of all the trauma that it's gone through. So a lot of the time, women who've undergone FGM tend to have C-sections versus vaginal deliveries. And even when they do have vaginal deliveries, it's just like a really, really, really horrible process. So like they end up with like this reproductive trauma for basically the rest of their life.
I think that's the part that I don't understand, because, especially that's something that's happening in our community, of course, and they call it very Islamic. And I don't think a Muslim should be going through that type of trauma, because most of the time it hinders a lot. It hinders your dealing with, to worship God, or to even be able to be fully here, which is what we call aqil and baligh, to be mature and completely, because, when you go through certain traumatic experiences, you're not really fully here. And I think that's just what puzzles me, because I think I found out about FGM, but I didn't really know a lot about it when I was doing research about you before I even reached out to talk to you. But then I saw this woman from Gambia. Her name is Haddijatou Ceesay or something like that. And I think she was someone who went through that. And one of the person who I know who's been advocating for this, it's an imam called Imam Fati. We already talked about him when we spoke on the phone. And it just puzzles me how someone like him is focusing on something that is pre-Islam. It's something that, and in my research, the Prophet seemed not to even talk about it. His wives didn't go through it. His daughters did not go through it. And there was a hadith that I don't even sure how 100% this hadith is, that he said something about, if you do it, don't cut too deep, or it's better maybe just to stay away from it. So I don't know why a scholar should be focusing on that and advocating that for every khutbah that he's even doing. You know, like, why do you think he's putting so much emphasis on this and pushing to actually preach this?
Okay, so I'm going to try and be really kind and not be mean or rude at all. I will keep my actual thoughts to myself.
But just say it the way it is. Yeah.
My thing is, again, a lot of these so-called religious men, first of all, they have no spine. Because when Jami was around and when Jami had decided to ban FGM, why were they quiet the entire time? If it was that important for our religion, why didn't they speak up?
So he banned it?
Well, around the ban for FGM happened under Jami's law, under Jami's rule.
Okay.
But it came from, obviously, activism and, you know, women like being in the front lines for years and years and years. But it's like, you were there at that time, but you didn't say anything. And then now all of a sudden you have all this time and all this energy to talk about something that actually has nothing to do with you to begin with. Like, I'm pretty sure if we went and asked his daughters and his wives, none of them probably underwent FGM. It's just this decision that, like, it makes me very upset. It really, really makes me upset.
No, it does, because
sitting there and, you know, saying all these things about, like, women's lives and women's bodies when it's like it's not impacting him at all, but then you're doing these things that is causing more harm to our communities consistently. Like, you know, for a fact, like, I don't know what kind of Islam this man is holding on to so tightly that is advocating for harm. And again, like I said in the beginning, Islam has this do no harm principle, and it's like FGM is literally causing harm directly. So how can you say that religion that literally tells people don't hurt one another, don't do anything to cause harm to someone, is the same religion that you're saying that you're, you know, is advocating for FGM? In what way?
Yeah, because, you know, I feel like there's just so many other societal issues that are going on right now. There's war going on. There's war going on in Israel and Palestine. There's so many other issues, societal issues that is changing, and Muslim needs to be talked about. Even in Gambia, we're going through so many things. But why? Because I Googled, I went to YouTube, literally just typed his name, and one of the first thing I see was him talking about FGM, because I don't understand Mandinka, so I can't say a lot about what he's saying or how he's saying it. But I just know there just seems to be his name that comes up every time the topic of FGM is talked about, and it just, honestly, it bothers me a lot. No, and it scares me. Yeah.
It's extremely, like, it is extremely frustrating because, first of all, like, you know, people have worked so hard on ensuring that FGM is something that is banned in the country. They've worked so hard to ensure the protection of girls and women throughout. And then this man is just coming and trying to undo every single part of it. And it's complete hypocrisy. It is just unjust. And it's not something that I'm getting more upset as it goes, because it's just like, you know that you're causing deliberate harm to people. And you know that this does not impact your livelihood in any way or another. But then what upsets me as well, it's this idea that they try to tell you that, you know, this ban on FGM, it's a Western thing. You know, that it's not if you come to our cultures and in our communities, FGM is something that has always happened and it should continue to happen. And we shouldn't let people from the West come and tell us what to do. No one from the West is telling us what to do. Women have understood that this is harmful to them. And, you know, there's been campaigns to be like, since like Dr. Haddijatou and stuff, back in the 80s and stuff, where people have been campaigning against FGM. So it's not some kind of new, you know, phenomenon that all of a sudden everyone is realizing that it's bad. It's not. It's always been a practice that is harmful. And even when they tried to, I know that the hadith, you know, even though I think the hadith is daif anyway. It's not something that's like actually, you know. So even then, like, when I think about that hadith about how like the Prophet allegedly said that, you know, that only cut a little bit or something, I think about the prohibition of alcohol. I think about how, like, even if this is a real hadith, when alcohol is being prohibited, we didn't just wake up one day and then Allah was like, well, alcohol is done.
No.
It was a step step process. And that's what happens with harm reduction in any kind of community. And in any, like, if you want a successful outcome, you don't just go from 0 to 100. So it could be that it was being practiced like at that time. And again, it wasn't even something that his daughters or his wife went through. It could be that it was being practiced, or his wives. It could be that it was being practiced at that time. And then it was like, okay, this is something that needs to end, but you can't just tell people to stop it ASAP. It's something that you slowly have to work towards reducing until it's over.
It does. It does. I mean, the alcohol part of it, if you see some of the verse that comes, there's one of the verse, لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى. You know, don't come near, you know, a prayer when you were drunk. So you see, like, which mean most of them probably used to be drunk and then come or have a drink and come and pray. So and then after it said فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ, stay away from it. So it was slowly coming until they had to stop it fully, because you know, they said if when the Quran came, if it came and everything was just prohibitions, like none of the Arabs would follow. But everything came in slowly. They had to teach them wisdom, teach them knowledge, teach them a lot of other things until they completely understood them exactly.
Teach them how to interact. Because I always say, like, for me, my true understanding of religion came once I switched my mind and realized that Islam is a way of life, and not like, it is a religion, obviously, but it's a way of how to interact with one another. It's very social justice oriented. It's about making sure that you're not causing deliberate harm to other people. Again, that's the one thing I stand on. It's this ensuring that you're not causing harm to someone else. So once you have that realization and that understanding, a lot of practices that we are like, oh, this is Islamic, you realize that how can that be something that Allah has ordained us to do? And if, you know, with them Imam Fati and stuff talking about Islam is so religious, that FGM is like such a big religious deal, then why are there not fatwas coming from Saudi and like all these other places to proclaim the legitimacy of FGM?
It's irrelevant. Because it's irrelevant to them. They are focused on other things that are more important matters. You know, they're not gonna, like, you know,
So why is it that all these other huge majority Muslim countries are not talking about it? Like, you are people that are literally fighting over whether you sighted the moon or not. But then you think you have legitimacy to claim that whether FGM is, you know, is proper or not.
I think their job is to speak, you know, is to talk. You know, that's why we have scholars. That's why we have, you know, people of knowledge. It's their job is to talk and to preach, not to actually preach for something though that is good, that is harmfully done. Because even if it was something that was permissible in Islam, right? If there was something that was really permissible, but if the person does not have, you know, does not want to do it, it's their choice not to do something. You shouldn't be even forcing the person not to do it. You know what I'm saying? The Prophet ﷺ did not forcefully go and kill people because they were just saying that they don't believe. It's because they attacked him. That's why he attacked back. So everything, it's just a way of communication. It's a way of just teaching instead of trying to force you. Because cutting someone from whichever part to keep them away from having pleasure, and it's mind-boggling. You know,
no, but I think it's a very deliberate way to just be. I'm just gonna say it. I don't think he's a good person. I do not think that he's a good person. I think he's a hypocrite. That is what I have to say. I don't know who's listening to the podcast, who's listening to the episode. I said it. Imam Fati is a hypocrite, and every single one of them that's standing behind him and saying all these things about, you know, trying to justify the permissibility of FGM. It's because it's not happening to you and you don't know people that it's happened to. But if you truly understood the harms, or not even if you truly understood, because they know the harms, but they're being willfully ignorant. It's this thing of like choosing violence over and over. Like, you're literally choosing to replicate violence on the bodies of women. Because if it was men that was undergoing that level of harm and that level of trauma, this conversation wouldn't have been had at all. True. So that's really the nicest way I can put it.
Yeah. Now, have you have any plans or strategies of working with the community and just to combat this? Or have you guys reached out to also any other religious leader apart from Imam Fati or anybody else in Gambia to deal with this situation?
No one reaches out to Imam Fati as a religious leader ever.
I'm talking about other people actually.
But there's really, really good religious, like, because the thing about it is like, because FGM has been clouded in like this religious lens for so long, you can't really go into communities and talk about it without like explaining or having a religious leader come on and explain that like FGM is not a religious requirement. So one of the ways in which like, you know, a lot of activists have worked through issues around FGM and sexual and reproductive health in general is like ensuring that like you have religious leaders in the community come out and talk about it. I remember Imam Babali was like one of the most like vocal and outspoken imams out there around FGM. So he definitely like was at conferences and all these kinds of things to talk about why FGM is harmful and why it's not a religious requirement to begin with. Because once, I think a lot of the time the fear is coming from the fact that people think that they're disobeying Allah by not going through FGM. So once like, you know, you have a respectable and reputable leader come out and tell you actually, no, this is not Islamic, there tends to be like limited hesitation. Because like once you remove that thing of like, I'm doing this to obey Allah, and you're realizing that, okay, this is actually just a cultural phenomena, people tend to be more receptive to understanding why they shouldn't continue the practice. So there's so many wonderful like advocates and like organizations that have been on the ground doing the work around FGM for forever. And, you know, just sending all of them the love that they need and the strength to keep going.
Yeah, I hope this can be something that can be stopped, definitely. Yeah. Now, your research covers also about sexual abuse, you know, which is a common problem worldwide, but I'm especially interested in it because it happens in our community a lot, you know, even within our Islamic community, you know, especially in religious communities. You know, sexual abuse happen a lot. Like I came from boarding school, so this is a topic that's a bit sensitive for me because I've witnessed it, you know, and I've almost, I would say, had to fight for it because, you know, the place where I was in, you will see an adult trying to assault a young boy, you know, and the young girls, and we used to hear these things. So this is something that followed me throughout my whole life, even if never talked about it, but how can we create that safe environment, you know, for people who are going through this and to be able to speak about it to their family or just address the issue overall?
I think there's a few things that I would say. I think sexual abuse is not the same thing as zina. Let me start off with saying that. So therefore, these rules around shame and stuff should not apply to sexual abuse. It's not the same thing. You know, you're not consenting to any kind of like sexual activity. So this idea of the haram and halal, first of all, needs to be set aside instantly when it comes to sexual abuse. And I think that's always where the fear comes from, where it's like, oh, if I talk about the fact that something happened to me, then the blame will be put on me as well. So there's this, it's always this thing of like, if I talk about it, then like people will ask me, oh, what were you wearing? What were you doing? For that person to even feel like they could, you know, talk to you or try and touch you or assault you in any kind of way. And even like, even if it happens as a child as well, you're still finding a way to blame yourself because all of the time the onus is placed on the victim to prove that, you know, they were the perfect victim or that like they shouldn't have been victimized, versus looking at the perpetrator, who at the end of the day is the one that should harbor the harm and harbor the, you know, harbor the shame for doing what they did to someone else. So I think it's really, really, really important that we learn to shift the blame from the victim to the perpetrator, and also have mechanisms in place for survivors or victims. So it's like, is it like some kind of having someone that they can talk to, you know, having the space to grieve what happened to them. And a lot of the time as well, like these issues of abuse and assault, it happens in our homes. It's not like it happens like, you know, whenever you think of rape and sexual violence, you're like, oh, it must be some random across, you know, in some dark alleyway that's doing this to someone. But that's not what happens. It's literally like, it's the uncles and the brothers and the the grandparents and stuff that's happening. And then when it happens, you see that like, even if you tell someone, they'll tell you to keep quiet because like they don't want to increase shame in the household, and nothing will happen to the perpetrator. So I think there needs to be laws around making sure that the perpetrator is
dealt with.
Yeah. So what that means, we can define it in our communities, and we can define, is it a prison sentence? Is it some kind of rehabilitation? Or like, it's just ensuring that also like you're protecting and preserving the safety and the rights of the victim.
Because it's just so strange how most of the time you hear it happens in places where you least expect it. Like I said, in like religious places, even when it comes to Christianity, you hear in the churches, in the boarding schools. And that disgusts me, like for me that went through boarding school, I can only talk from boarding school perspective. Like I know the things that go on there. Of course, there's a lot of good teaching there. Things happen there, good things happen there. But some of the traumatic things that happen, like there are so many things that follow me till today that if I were to speak about I think I did a podcast not long ago. It's a solo episode. I was talking about trauma and some of the things I went through there. But I actually didn't even know about the word trauma, because sometimes when you think about it, trauma is you only known about trauma when someone tell you, oh, you're traumatized, like whatever you went through was abuse, or was sexual abuse, or was this or was that. So it's just strange. Why does it happen in those kind of places? Like that's what I don't understand. I
mean, it makes sense though, because those places I think anytime there's like some kind of hierarchy or structure around like who is, basically it's this idea that the closer you are to God, and I'm using quotations to say closer, then the whatever you do is justifiable. So it's just like, it's the spiritual abuse and it's this misuse of religion that puts people in positions of power. So it's this continuous replication of power structures where it's like, oh, you can't tell me anything because like I'm an imam and I'm an ustaz and I'm these things and I'm that thing. So therefore anything that I do is okay. And it's like, because as well, they have that protection of power. As a young child, if you go and try and report that, oh, my imam did this or my ustaz did this to me, most of the time they won't believe you. Or even if they do believe you, it's like, okay, but this is a man of God. How can they do that? Or if this is a man of God, so it must be okay for them to do that. Like there has to be a reason for them to do that. Like I remember I was watching this YouTube video. It was a documentary a while ago about how like a lot of these like healers, quote unquote, like these sittings and these ustazes or whatnot will talk about, you'll go up to them for healing, and then like they'll touch you inappropriately and tell you that the only way I can heal you is like if I have sex with you, if I do this or if I do that. And if you, again, don't have like an understanding of the religion, you're going to think, oh, that must be okay since this authority figure is telling that to me.
It's disgusting.
It's very disgusting. And I think we need to knock those people off a pedestal. We need to stop thinking that just because someone has religious knowledge, that it means that everything that they do is fine. Because at the end of the day, we are all equal in the eyes of Allah. Basically, we should all be equal. And it doesn't matter. Yeah. So it does not matter who you think this person is. That does not mean that they can't harm people. And we tend to protect them so much. And it just continues as a cycle where it's like every single time you're hearing the same stories over and over and over, and nothing is being done about it. And then we are raising a generation or generations of people who are depressed, who, who lose their faith, who lose their community, who lose so much, who want nothing to do with, God, nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with anyone at all, because of that you're conflating what you went through, and rightfully so, like you're conflating what you went through with the entirety of a religion.
Yeah, like, true. Because just my experience with going to boarding school made me question and doubt Islam a lot until I had to learn for myself again, and of course understand that Islam was not defined by what a Muslim person did to me or what a regular man did to me. But you know what I mean? So it's more about just, yeah, like it does change a lot. It just makes you judge a whole religion because of what a person do to you, and that's just so disgusting. And the people that you think are going to be the one to teach you about these things are the one that are actually deceiving you or doing the other way.
Yeah, they are. And they gatekeep, and I think we tend to gatekeep knowledge around. The thing is, I've known so many people that have had to like relearn Islam for themselves because of the way in which like people that are Muslim treated them. And for me as well, like I think these past few years has been like very crucial for me to like actually sit down and have an understanding and knowledge of my religion and choose it for myself. And because, you come, like you're talking about, and I realize like, we talk, obviously we're supposed to be talking about sex and all that a lot, but like my religion is so deeply important to me. And it's literally for me, it's like a way of life. And it's the way in which like I try to situate and balance everything that I do. So it's like, one thing about me, I will always talk about Islam in one way or another. But this happened because I had to like take the time to know what Islam was and to know what Allah was saying, to know what the Prophet ﷺ was saying, and like, all of that. And it's like having that understanding actually gave me the confidence to do the kind of work that I'm doing now.
Okay.
So it's like, if you hear anyone say, oh, they're talking about sex, teaching sex, you're automatically going to assume, oh, this has to be so un-Islamic, haram, 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 haram. But it's like, and I always say this, but like you're talking about a religion again where everything starts with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allah is telling you consistently over and over every single time that He is the most gracious and the most merciful. Like all of the time. And you're telling us that like that kind of mercy doesn't extend to everyone. If someone that is that, if we're believing in someone that is that gracious and that merciful, then abuse, harm in any kind of way should absolutely have no place in Islam. It's not something that should be it's not even something that we should be hearing in religious spaces at all. But we are not, the way that like Islam is being taught to us, it doesn't leave space for the good. All you hear is, astaghfirullah, you're going to hell, haram, 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 haram. That's all you hear. But you don't hear about the goodness that comes with it. You don't hear about the fact that like so many harmful practices, like, back in the day, like when people had daughters, like they would kill their daughters because like women weren't viewed as important. Like, so going from that to the fact that like the Prophet ﷺ's last sermon was talking about protecting women, and you're literally, how can, a religion like that exist and talk about protecting women and protecting and stopping harm? And then you're telling me that like practices like FGM should continue, or like sexual violence is something that should be swept under the rug. Like if we talk, like, do we think that these practices would occur in prophetic times and the Prophet ﷺ would just sit down and say nothing and do nothing about it?
Exactly.
Like it's such a, just for me, again, it's just always like, I just always think about it from a social justice perspective. I think because I've been in social justice for so long, that's the way that like my brain now automatically like switches when I think about Islam, where it's like, it's for the protection and the preservation of people. So, yeah,
I think that's a very beautiful way. Wow. That's very beautiful. I think it was just like being young, just lack of, and allowing us to ask why, I feel like when we were young, we were not allowed to ask a lot of whys. We were just told what to do, and we're just supposed to do it. So if you do something bad, you're bad. You're probably going to go to hell, and this is going to happen to you. There was never,
There's
and
no
I think
nuance.
that's why I like a part of the way we raise children now, where we kind of give them a little bit of, that voice to be able to talk, tell it, for them to tell us how they feel. Back in the day, when you say how you feel or what's like, even to choose what you want, where you want your life to go was seen as you're being a rebel. You know what I mean? So a lot of it had to do with just the way our parents raised us. And I feel like they only did what they know, because that's how their parents taught them, and it just keep going and going. And I guess it's up to us to start being more open-minded to actually really understand what Islam is all about, what our religion is all about. And if we understand how it is, I think it will be a better society, because sometimes I do look at the society now and see that like things are going so bad. But, if we really learn our religion and understand what it says and try to advocate for that, I think it will be a better and a safer society.
Yeah. And I want to say that like being Muslim doesn't just mean the 5 times, like praying 5 times a day and fasting, because you can do that and still again be causing harm to someone. So it's about making sure that we're living in a society that protects the most vulnerable as well. That we're making sure that we're protecting people. So if someone, has undergone assault or abuse in any kind of way, and it is from a religious leader, it's okay. It should be advocated for to prosecute that person, to make sure that religious leaders as well know that they're not on some kind of pedestal where like everything they do and or say is fine. We all have the same access to God. So just because, you think you know more doesn't mean that it puts you in a place where you can cause harm to someone else. So, it's important to redefine what even it means to be religious. Because the minute because it happens all the time where it's like you say, oh, this person did X, Y, and Z. And it's like, oh, how could that person have done it? They pray all the time. They do this, they do that. But it's like, that doesn't make them, that doesn't make them a good person. And this is like for across all the board in any kind of religion, like be it Islam, be it Christianity, be it Buddhism, Hinduism, anything. Like at the end of the day, abuse is abuse and harm is harm. And any person that's perpetuating it doesn't deserve to have any kind of status in society that protects them.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah. I was going to ask my final question, but it feels like you've kind of overall just said it. But I'll still ask it and see how you're going to answer it, which is just, what is the most important message or takeaway that you hope your audience or people at society, society at large will gain from your advocacy and work? I feel like you've already kind of answered it.
I kind of, but I also think, I just think it's important to, one, be kind to one another. I think my biggest advocacy is kindness and love. I think it's very, very important that we always show each other kindness and love in any kind of way, but also communicate. If there's one thing I always talk about, is the fact that like it's so important to talk about issues that are happening, because then you realize that nothing is happening in a bubble or in some kind of a monolith. Like all of our traumas, all of our experiences are interlinked. And the only way that we will be able to help one another and to strive for and live in a society without harm is, one, through talking about it and like just being there for one another. I think it's really, really, really important that we allow each other the safety and, the room to just be good to each other. And so I think that's really what I want to say. And also stop listening to these religious leaders. Half of the time they don't know what they're talking about. They only have an agenda that is, that is fulfilling for them versus the common good and then the greater good. So, I
mean, I hope you continue to do your work. Just now you're talking and I'm thinking about it, like every time I'm like, when I'm doing this podcast, it's like, I'm always thinking the reason why I want to do it. And today you give me more reason to continue to keep going, because I want people like you, I want your voices to be heard. And I feel like if I could do anything, which is by having this platform for people to listen in Gambia or anywhere, for people like you to be able to talk. And because I'm sure this is the first time we're going to be having this kind of conversation, because I think this is the only podcast in the Gambia and I'm very proud of it. But, like it just motivates me just to keep going and, to push more and to have people like you in this place and, to share your voice. So I really appreciate you coming here and having this conversation with me.
No, I appreciate you for having me. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk. Yeah. And time went by so fast. I didn't even realize, it's been over an hour now. But it's definitely been such a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I feel like we're going to do this more, because I feel like I have so many other things we can talk about, we can get into. But I
am open. Me and you, we go way back. So whenever you want me around to talk, I'm around.
Definitely. Haddi.
So thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, boss. Take care.
All right. Everyone, bye-bye.